Hello, welcome to season 5 of Hot Pot Talks. My name is Jen Sunshine, and here with my dear friend and longtime creative partner, David Ng, as well as our special guests, Namande and Siwe. David and I are the co artistic directors of Love Intersections, a media arts collective based in Vancouver, Canada, that produces intersectional and intergenerational film and artwork from underrepresented communities of color. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that Hot Pot Talks is organized from the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. As uninvited guests, we recognize and extend our gratitude to the stewards of this land who have been protecting it since time immemorial. Part of our work as activists and queer artists on unceded territories means working in solidarity with ongoing Indigenous struggles for sovereignty, decolonization, reparations, and land back.
Yeah, and for season 5, we're really excited to be collaborating with our new co-host. Namande Mkhalisa is a longtime collaborator of Love Intersections. Namande is a fat Black feminist in love with stories. She is fascinated by the ways people's lived realities shape their joys and pains, and believes that there is healing to be found in the stories we choose to tell and salvation, perhaps, in who we choose to tell them to. Radical softness is her weapon of choice in a world that often casts her as a hard, fat, Black obstacle. Food, hunger, sex, access, and desirability are her favorite topics. She is a feminist scholar. Fat activism, sustainability, and climate resilience and food security are her passions. Please welcome Namande. No, hey, Namande. Maybe if you could describe to us the theme of this season of Hot Pot Talks and introduce Siwe as well.
Sure. So, over the last sort of 5 years, I have leaned quite heavily into trying to understand how we find joy and peace in a state of grief, a state of loss, and states of fear. And a lot of this was inspired. I don't know if the word inspired is the correct word, but it was inspired by my father's death and the work I had to do to sort of place myself once again in a world that made sense. I had to find meaning in a world he wasn't in anymore. And how I did that was by reclaiming many of the things that colonialism and slavery stole from us. And mainly amongst those things that I reclaimed was indigenous spiritual African practice. I mean, that's a massively big umbrella. There's so many different kinds of practice on the continent as a whole. And so my focus, I would say, would have been the South African practice, the bits I knew that I grew up with, and then the research and learning I did to learn more about the practice that existed in my home before colonialism and slavery. And from there, the journey grew. I wanted to find out how we reclaim other parts of ourselves that make us whole and make our lives richer, how we reclaim spaces, how we reclaim food. What are the things we used to eat? What are the rituals of joy and family and love and food and religion that we used to practice that made us whole? And so when I spoke to Jen and David about doing a hot pot talks with people from the African diaspora and also from Canada, from the US, from the West, about the subject, they were keen. And so here we are. And yeah, we hope you guys enjoy it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Namandi,
Yeah,
do you want to
and
introduce
I want to introduce
Siwe?
Siwe. So Siwe is our first guest in this series. And I have been stalking Siwe online for like the last 2 or 3 years. I've been massively inspired by the work she and her friends, colleagues are doing in Johannesburg Central Business District. It is Joburg CBD is a political area, very political area. It always has been, and I think since 1994, and our first democratic elections in South Africa, even more so. It used to be a place when I was young, I used to go clubbing in. I no longer club in the CBD. I'm an old lady now. But it has since become, I think, a space of artworks, but also a space of great pain. Um, and I love the fact that Siwe and her collective are reclaiming that space and doing work there that I think, honestly, the whole world needs to know about. I'm going to read Siwa's bio just to give you a more detailed, kind of in depth expression of who she is and what they do in her own words. So, Siwa's collective is called the Exotically Divine Pulse. We are an organization called Exotically Divine Pulse, based in the inner city of Johannesburg at a heritage site called the Drill Hall, which was a military base in the First World War. Our mission is to expand access to African vegetarian foods and promote living a healthy life in cities. At our site, where we practice from, we collect waste to create artworks, create compost, and use plants to change the energy of the space and create a comfortable environment amidst the heavy history of exclusion, violence, and injustice that is associated with the site. Our mission is to reforest the city, bringing natural life back into the city to improve the quality of life and rise the energy of the inner city. Our work confronts and contrasts with the heritage site, allowing new interpretations of the space, time, and experiences. Our organization is a site of learning as we dry African food and vegetables. We plant medicinal indigenous plants, and we also go into communities to cook African vegetarian foods with them. Our way of educating the community is through play and conversation, enabling lived experiences and personal stories to take center stage as a resource of wisdom. The organization is founded by four people: Siwe, Ayanda, Kanyapa, and Forrest, who are each on their mission to live a healthy lifestyle. We are all vegetarians who have been connected by our love for African food and bringing African food from the periphery into the mainstream. Yeah, and that's Siwe. Welcome, Siwe. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Wow, that sounds like a mouthful. So you're doing all that.
But such incredible, like, it sounds like such incredible work, Siwei. Maybe as a jumping off point, I'm curious, what was the inspiration behind starting Exotically Divine Pulse, and how did you get started?
Well, before becoming a nonprofit organization, it was actually a restaurant that was operating in one of the small suburbs, Malville, if you know it, Nomonde, in 27 boxes. It was quite a unique space where, and it was mostly guys, young men who are like running this kitchen, very providing like another perspective on like food and gender roles, all of that image about men and cooking. And it's also these exotic foods, So it was a restaurant. And this was before I had met them. And then COVID hit and the restaurant had to close down. So they started doing more work at the drill hole, planting more, removing the bricks on the site and putting soil and planting trees. And just this idea that the work of bringing the food out of this restaurant kind of commercial space, but bring it more to the community now, people being able to connect with these foods. And so they started these programs. One of them was the African course meal, where we, get all these, source these ingredients, and then we go to a certain community and work on the garden. There were also like river cleanings going on, different art exhibitions that were happening in the space. So the more activities, were starting to come into the space and bring more artists into the space. That's when I met them in 2021. And at this stage, I think the organization was going through kind of a shed where people were going through their own missions, because they were initially like 15 people, working in the space, kind of like freelance cook assistants kind of a situation. And Khanyapa was mentoring a lot of them, including Forest. So it was just this community that was developing. And I came in at the time where, people had started finding their own missions, starting their own careers, because these are all very young people, like in their early 20s, late teens, and then when I met them, that's when we started to, think of this now as formalizing this organization, and with my interest in, like, space and spatial planning, and how the city works, how do we feed the city, housing, and art and design, all of these things were happening in the space, and I was so fascinated. I just started spending more time in the space, and then eventually we grew to, yeah, just have this incredible bond. We've connected on an incredibly deep level just based on the lifestyle. So, yeah, I was just incredibly blessed to also be in a workspace, because I was also at work when I met them,
Mm.
actually. I was still working for the South African Cities Network at the time, and they were doing the catering for that event. And just talking to them and hearing about the drill hall, I was like, I have to go there. And I set an appointment. I went there, and after that first time, I spent like almost every week there. Like, yeah, the whole journey of how I became this plant-based baker also started from there, because they were really excited to meet someone who bakes. But this was before I
Mm.
became plant-based, and I would go home and I would practice all these egg-free, cakes, and I'd take it to the drill hall, like, guys, taste what I did. And they would be so excited, and they would validate everything, and that would push me even more, like, okay, now I want to try something else. So we just got into this space of sharing energy where we were experimenting and exploring. We were even making cassava flour at some point. We bought cassava and we dried it, and we made flour, we made coconut oil. It was just a whole,
Wow.
time where we just got excited. The energy was really enabling at that time for my learning as well, for me wanting to expand as a baker. I
Mhm.
got really challenged and pushed so much. So, like, yeah, I really cherish those days. That was really one of the founding, really core memories of how our organization began.
Wow.
Amazing.
Thank you. Such a fascinating, as you say, core memory. I'm particularly interested in how people and the journey that people have, becoming plant-based, becoming vegetarians, becoming vegans, etc. However you sort of identify, yourself. So I was raised vegetarian because I come from a long line of Buddhists in Taiwan who are quite rigorous in their Buddhist practice. So it's the vegetarianism is very embedded in sort of the the Buddhist practice and ethos around not harming life.
Yeah.
Um, and so I've always had this sort of special relationship to food growing up because obviously I didn't have an understanding of why my friends in my classmates would be eating meat and would be fish and they get to eat all this delicious smelling and food, but I at home I would it wasn't like it wasn't delicious, but I just did I think as a kid you're like you want to be the same as as your friends. You want to be the same as everybody. You didn't want to. I don't want to stand out, right? So I always felt left out and also excluded from that experience. But of course, I respected my parents and the household that I was raised in. So of course, I was just vegetarian. But I did the sort of the opposite, with in the West, where sort of there's this stereotype where if like a white person, if they're rebelling, usually in their teenage years, when they're rebelling, they become vegetarians. That's sort of the narrative, and it was the opposite for me, where when I was a teenager, and this is maybe a few years after I had immigrated to Canada, specifically in the West Coast in British Columbia, and I rebelled by, trying fish. I rebelled by trying, white meat, specifically like turkey and chicken. And of course, my parents were so disappointed and so upset, right? But I never did really try any sort of red meat. So I still to this day, I don't really know what pork or beef or lamb tastes like. Anyway, I'm digressing here, but I do think it's really interesting. And so I want to connect this back to your journey becoming plant based and what that story is. as well as I think it's helpful if you could place yourself. You're joining from, where are you joining from? And yeah, what is that journey for you, Siwe, and to you, Nomande, as well.
Ooh. So yeah, I relate to those kind of with the story you were telling about how food is, there's a lot of emotion I think that can end up being tied to food. A lot of it could have been, shame or guilt, but there's also other, I have very positive memories of like just eating vegetarian meals growing up. So I grew up in Durban, and Durban is has, I think, the second highest population of a concentration of Indians outside of India. So we have very present Indian culture in Durban. So I was exposed to brinjal, eggplant, um, chickpea flour, bajia, all of these different vegetables, even yeah, biryani and all these spices and fragrances, and eating bean, bunny chows, just those flavors, and being able to have a full meal and be satisfied just with veggies or grains or beans. So that was something that I had grown up with. My mom is an incredible cook. And so I'd always been eating these different curries, growing up. My mom was even a caterer. She used to cook for
Oh, wow.
different events and all of that. And some of the Indian people she would cook for, they're like, "Ah, your mom cooks like an Indian woman. Like your mom's cooking is amazing." So she was even approved by this community. Right? Amazing her food is. So it really comes from that exposure to different types of ingredients, and just the curiosity about food, and embracing kind of the local culture of where you are, because it's very much embedded. I think the Zulu and Indian culture, there's quite something interesting that's happening with how it's interfaced, just in terms of
Mm.
how we curries now. There's always spices, especially if you're from Durban. You know that you have to add your spices, and you cook in a certain, those kinds of things. So I think, for me, that was an interesting thing to experience. So this I was still working in Durban at the time, and I realized that I'd gone, like, it was a Wednesday and I hadn't eaten meat since like the previous Sunday. So then I was like, let me just continue with this and see what happens. Yo, things happened. I just kind of voluntarily put myself through this detox. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't really think about it that deeply. I was just like, let me see how this goes if I continue. And at that time, I was quite depressed, very much like asking myself, just going through this existential crisis. The work that I'm doing is not satisfying to me. It doesn't really feel like it's part of my soul mission of what I'm here to do. So a lot of those negative self-talk kind of things going on in my mind. And as I was going through this process of like this detox of eating these foods, I did feel kind of I don't want to say unwell, but I felt that there was this toxins kind of leaving my body, being in this mode of like wanting to rest or be still. But after that seventh day, my energy levels just peak like this. I don't know if it was my body adjusting or trying to get used to what was going on. But after that, like the following Sunday had come, my energy levels were up. I was so like looking forward to the next day. Now my, ideas are opening up, and just experiencing that component just made me think, no, I have to continue with this. Let me go forward, and see what goes here. But it wasn't necessarily like completely that I left meat. Maybe it took me like 2 years to kind of wean myself off. I stopped eating red meat first, then I stopped eating like the white meat, and just gradually then, by 2021, stopping to eat like dairy, and yeah, meat completely. So it was quite gradual, I guess. I think what I've found is it's important to be gentle with yourself, because there's this image you have of your higher self, your healed self, your the self that's accomplished everything and has reached this level of what you think your soul is meant to do versus where you are. And that gap is like can be very big, and sometimes you feel like you're closer to it, sometimes you're further away. So just observing those ebbs and flows and being kind to yourself in that part was very important. So when I moved to Johannesburg, which is where I am now, and I'd always been affirming before I moved here, saying that I attract like-minded people who love and support me. I'd been saying this for like 2 years or something. And then when I came here to Joburg, really, I did attract Exotically Divine Pulse. And it was just like, yo, this is where, the higher version of me needs to be, a space where there's so much love, there's creativity, there's community, there is care, care for yourself, but care for your environment, your community, your family, care for the future, the person, next to you, and all of those things. So it's definitely been a journey more than just about the food. You see how the food is just a tool, it's a connector, but there's a whole lifestyle, there's a whole culture, there's community, there's history around the food, there's coming together around the food. There's so much, yeah, that we can learn just by understanding how our food, systems work and what are the ways that we come together as people.
Mm.
No, that's so exciting. I mean, this is the inspiration for Hot Pot Talks. Actually, 5 years
Mm.
ago was exactly what you're describing about these practices of doing food sharing, and the ceremony of hot pot,
Mm,
food as ceremony, as community. um yeah, no, this is very exciting. um uh
Mm.
Siwe, I wanted to ask you, you had touched on sort of the space of where Exotically Divine Pulse does your the work in the CBD. um and it's resonating a lot because Jen and I have a studio in Chinatown in Vancouver, and Chinatown is in Vancouver is right next is basically in downtown Vancouver, but it's a space that sort of really faces a lot of it's called urban geographers call it now a food desert, because of the rising housing costs, because of the rising real estate costs.
yeah.
A lot of what was traditionally spaces that were really affordable, Chinese grocers, or that would serve the now very elderly population, have all had to leave because of gentrification and all these different changes in the city. And so there's a lot of organizing that's being done in the community around not just like access, like food security, but also like also culturally appropriate foods too, so that the elders that are accessing the foods are have meaning to them as well. And so I'm curious, you were talking about the space, like I think it was Drill Hall, and some of the other work you're doing around the neighborhoods. I'm curious about the space and what Exotically Divine Pulse is thinking about. I heard it a little bit in your bio, and I'm just curious to hear more about it.
Yeah, the space has a lot of history. So it's one of the oldest buildings in the inner city of Joburg. It was built in 1904. Yeah, and like Nomande had mentioned in the bio, it was essentially a military base. People would go there to sign up to go be in the war, in the First World War. And eventually it became a limb factory. So people who came back from the war without limbs, that was the factory where they would create limbs. And get them healed in that way. So there was also that the war and the after war kind of story that's happening there. But interestingly, during apartheid, it was also a prison. So they had actually placed the male and female prisoners in one space, and they had decided at a point to move them to another heritage site called Constitution Hill, where the women's jail is now.
Mm.
Um, yeah, it's also a heritage site not far from the drill hall. And it's been through quite a lot. Even the treason trial during apartheid, when a lot of the anti-apartheid struggle heroes were arrested, and the trial was held at the drill hall. So there's a lot of this history around belonging, I guess, and really speaking about what kind of a heritage do we want, or in terms of the commentary that we want to have in the space. Because no wonder was speaking about how we are all in fact quite curious at this time, I think, as young black people, as Africans, just curious about this idea of understanding what did our ancestors, do before, what were their practices, what are their rituals, what did they eat, how did they, the work at the drill hole, for me, it takes that question further, because you speak about tracing our existence. So the whole space now, really is a space that commemorates what we are experiencing now, which Forrest likes to call it the waste age. We've been through the ice age and the stone age, but now we're in the waste age. That's the story of the inner city. It's waste, whether it's food waste or whether it's waste from the fashion district, from all of this fast fashion that we're experiencing, or overconsumption that we're experiencing. All of these different things are kind of represented in the way that the drill hole space has now been designed. So after apartheid, the city was trying to kind of revitalize the space in terms of bringing artists into the space. And this is one thing that really excites me, is how we have the potential to revitalize our inner city urban spaces using the perspective of artists and art themselves, bringing this idea of play, bringing this idea of community, color, and just activating spaces. A lot of what makes us feel unsafe is because there's a lot of things not happening. There aren't enough activities, there aren't enough people, there aren't enough things to do, really. So at the drill hole, that's what we're also trying to do, is make a space where artists can come to create. There's a lot of artists who don't have spaces or studios, or can't get into galleries because of all of these, boundaries that there may be. So that's what we're also doing. And even so, I'm just trying to paint a picture of what the drill hole is like. So even with this idea of tracing our existence, our perspective on it is also looking at how did our ancestors design their spaces? What was decoration for them? And one of the interesting things for me was the use of uh, cow skulls. So there's this culture of eating meat from the cow head, inyama yenhloko they call it here, and that's also happening in the inner city. So there's spaces where they are processing that, and a lot of it we find these skulls that are just thrown around, right? And this was
Mm,
very taboo, I would say, in ancient African practice, because when you sacrifice an animal, you use the whole part. You're going to eat every part of the animal. You're going to keep the skin and use it for whether it's warmth or clothing or mats or whatever it is. You're going to keep the skull, and maybe some of them will put it. I even have one here at the back. Some of them put it, they hang it somewhere prominent in the house, because there wasn't this idea about shame when eating. We were willing
mm,
to kind of take the responsibility that we have done this act. And by keeping all of these parts of this animal visible and using it fully, shows that we really respect this animal, in that sense that once it has been sacrificed, we need to use it to its full ability, right? So that's, personally, that's my kind of where I hesitate around this idea of veganism, because it's kind of limited to that part around saying don't eat animals. But what happens when the animal has been eaten? Eat the
mm,
whole part, eat the intestines, make sure the whole thing is used. Use the skin to make leather if need be. You know what I mean? So just that part around understanding sustainability, and the intention of it is around paying homage to nature, making sure that we are well connected. There's um, a recognition that a source of life has been taken. How can you respect it
mm,
even after the life has been taken? So a little project we call Buyisela Inkomo Zobaba, which is also about bringing back what was stolen, not in terms of only the land, but the wealth that was the cattle
mm,
that was on those plots of land. Right? So even having these installations of the skulls is also speaking to that, around how we can start to use these symbols of what the waste is, what the waste is saying about us, because there's
Mm.
that part that I find quite interesting about even this idea of composting and collecting waste, is even the
Mm,
shame that we have around what we eat. I don't want to. There's my sister's neighbors who sometimes when they take out their garbage, they put it across the road to make it seem like it's my sister whose garbage it was. Even just that idea, I don't want to own my own stuff. This is the waste I
Right.
used. So those are the things that I think quite interesting for me in terms of the space at the drill hole, that we are confronting all of these ideas around the urban lifestyle. What does it mean?
Mhm.
How do we become conscious consumers and not just consuming for the sake of it and things that are going to be thrown away, but how do we bring back life to certain things that have been discarded and no longer seen as useful? But how can you bring it
mm,
back in another form, through art, through bring it in decoration or whatever it may be, to continue paying homage to that piece of history? So that's kind of what the space is and what it's about,
Mm.
and what you can expect when you come to visit.
yes.
Amazing.
Siwe, I have a question for you. So, with regards to the CBD, you guys speak about renewal. You speak about bringing life back into the city. Um, I mean, as you know, and maybe I should give a bit of a background, but in on our continent, when the colonizers left, or were removed, ousted, when the revolutions succeeded and we kicked them out. Um, After they fled, much of the urban spaces and the infrastructure they left behind survived maybe 10, 20 years and then begin to decay. So if you visit urban spaces all over the continent, East Africa, West Africa, Central, and now South Africa, you cannot look away from the undeniable kind of decay that has taken place um, when the colonizers were ousted. And there's many reasons for that. There's a lot of racist people who say, oh, black people can't take care of anything. Those conversations are still happening today in South Africa. You find these TikTok groups where people literally are posting like pictures of old Joburg and then they're like, yeah, see, this was amazing and the blacks took it over, now it sucks. And literally people are saying things like that today in South Africa. And they say things like that about all of the cities on the African continent. You go anywhere on our continent and you're gonna find people saying things like that. And the sad thing is not just colonizers saying that, it is black people saying that about our own spaces. And so I'm super interested in your take on how we renew those spaces. I my take is that we don't look back, we look forward and see how we can make them work for us today and now, and for the people who inhabit them now, because the people who inhabited them are then are gone. It's a now thing. And how we make those changes without falling prey to gentrification. And I know you're also studying urban development, so I'd really love to hear your thoughts on that, and how we make CBD spaces the kind of beautiful modern African places that they can be in South Africa and then hopefully on the rest of the continent. What's your thoughts on that?
Hmm. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. The first thing for me is I believe spaces should be reflective of the people who are using them. So I often find it's not fair to say that we haven't taken care of the colonial legacy buildings that are around, because that's not our design. Even the way that those buildings came to be, there's enslavement, there's poor treatment, there's just the energy around all of those things. But we are here now. Those are the cities that we've inherited, and we have to do something about it. And I think one of the most successful things that the apartheid project did was this idea of placing people in inhumane environments, because if you place people in an inhumane environment, they will act in an inhumane way. And that's what I feel has been the result of a lot of the neglect that we see in a lot of our inner cities. It's always been a space of you know uh, you come in the morning to perform labor in the space, and then you go back to your township or ghetto settlement, and that lifestyle is still what we are living, even though we are very much in the post colonial era. A lot of I've worked with quite a few people who work in kind of the city, whether it's in the urban development space or city transformation, public transport, and all of that. And what I find is that we are not, how can I say this? We are kind of on the same page about the future that we want or the city that we want. I mean, in the basis of it, like the gist of it, we all want a space where we can find employment that is dignified, that is safe, that can allow me to feel good about the work that I do, contribute to my community, help my family, and live in a dignified space that is beautiful and comfortable and safe, and all of those things, right? And I find that in the how we do this work of regenerating our cities, we have neglected, as people who are like the decision makers, or the people who are working in all of these different departments in the city and the municipality. There's the kind of this assumption that we are not on the same page. So in our experience as Exotically Divine, we are practicalizing all of the things that the city has in its climate action plan, in its social development plan, in its plan about food security. We are doing all of those things. And this is not unique to Exotically Divine Pulse. There are a lot of community-based organizations run by young people who are doing exactly what is set out in the bigger mission of the city. And I find once we find a space where these can meet, I think that's when the magic can happen. Because I believe, and even there is a way of doing it, but I think one of the ways to kind of approach this reforesting the city, or anything that we want to contribute towards our city, because this is us wanting to contribute towards creating the future that we want, is around that, creating those spaces where there can be interaction around people who make decisions and have the budget, and people who have the ideas and the experience. Because a lot of the time you find our government or the local municipality, whatever it is, they can cover the breadth of things, so their money can go wide, it can cover the breadth of things. But what community-based organizations for me can do is cover the depth of things, so they can go deeper. They know the grassroots organizations, they know the communities, they know the community leaders, and what skills are embedded in community and all of that. So for me, it's about finding a way for Exotically Divine or other organizations like us to reach like service level agreements with the city, to say, hey, we can take on this part of your mission of trying to put green roofs all across the city. We can take this mission that you have of reducing waste to the landfill. We can take that load off of you. So I think there's also that contribution, I guess, and it's one of the missions that we have as Exotically Divine right now, to actually get to that level of even offering what we have as a solution that can benefit not just those in our community and our circles, but really these are solutions that can contribute to the well-being of the city, and making sure that we are actually meeting the different targets and the goals that we have. So without, I think things like gentrification happen when there are things that are kind of left to the market, whereas I think we have a responsibility to intervene and be very intentional about the kind of developments, the kind of businesses, the kind of shops, the kinds of grocery stores that we allow. Because there's even in my research, I'm just finding that there's a lot of more space that's being given to these big retailers, and they're getting obviously the most prime retail. They are on all of the transport routes, so that you just stop by there and you get something and you go home. But for the African shops that we are discovering, you have to go deep into the city. It's a small shop, and you have to know who, and they're probably in a dingy part. The rubbish hasn't been collected. There's potholes.
Mm.
It feels unsafe. All of
But
those things.
that's where the good food is. right? Like, that's where the good food. It's not the fast food, drive through spaces where you just get in, get out. Where
Yeah.
we're seeing so many, restaurants even just because of the convenience of like just ordering your food through an app,
Mm.
where it's just no longer this place of gathering and hang out. But if you really look deeper, like the places that have the best food are the places that are just so run down, like hole in the wall, right?
Mhm.
I guess I want to just, sort of, as you were speaking, I was trying to think of, I want to ask you if you can give us some examples of, like specific examples,
Mm.
um, of the design of that city you want to live in. And in particular, the word play stood out. And perhaps because I love the word play, I also love the concept of play and the philosophies of play. And I think play is something that is lifelong, right? It's not just something that is limited to kids and children, and you all of a sudden you get to 18 years old, or you of our age, you get of age, you're all of a sudden not playful. So I want to just understand a little bit about your definition of play, within the organization, but also for yourself, and how what your relationship to play is, and maybe, yeah, give us some examples of that.
Hmm. Wow. I think just in terms of the kind of city in general that I would want to live in, one of the main things for me is being able to have free fun. I think, yeah, maybe having grown up in Durban, I think it was always just a given that we can just go to the beach and you bring your own
Mm.
snacks, or you go to the park and do whatever.
Yeah.
Uh, Having free fun, but also not being, I don't know, is it about being monitored? I don't know. There's this thing around how black bodies should act in public space that I find
Uh-huh.
quite strange. So there's this interaction that the organization that we once had when they were trying to do yoga in a public park right by the drill hole. And they were sitting in a circle, with the yoga mats and everything, and the instructor's there, and the security says, "Hey, what are you doing here? What is this? Why are you sitting in a circle? Hey, why is that? What are you coming to do?" Just before they even started anything, right? And this is the same park where you're not allowed to lie down, for example, because they think you're a vagrant, you're homeless, you're coming here to sleep. But if you go to another part of the city, lying down in the park is fine. It's normal because you come to the park to rest, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the other big things for me that is just not, yeah, I guess the policing just of how to act in public space. If we could not have that, that would be ideal for me. And even just, yeah, just having other understandings of what it means to just exist like in space. I don't think that's yeah, just from that experience, I think that's something that is quite lacking, that I think we need to be, yeah, pay more attention to. But for me, I think the idea of fun, or play and fun is kind of like quite together for me. But just any space where we can, I think, making music, or just having fun with our voices, whether it's different instruments. I think that's one of the main ways that I like to play, or play. But just in general, being creative and like exploring whatever it is. So even with your actual body, I've been enjoying that process of just like drumming on myself, or just making like certain humming sounds and things. I think I'm very much into that sound led. I think since I heard this thing around how humming is also very healing or soothing to the womb, I've
Mm.
been very interested in doing that, like yeah, as a form of just, I guess, meditation and just relaxation. I think that's the kind of play that I engage in, definitely. But we play a lot of games, mental games. We have a fruit memory game that we play, yeah, which is quite exciting. Just those things that also can get the mind working without it feeling too intense.
Yeah. One of my struggles about Johannesburg specifically, living not just Gauteng, um, we live in like a concrete space. It's heavy
Yeah.
concrete. It's expensive. You don't get around without a car. You're driving everywhere. Our public transport systems are not the greatest. And when I think of play in our context, I just
Yeah.
wish there were more places where you could bury your feet in the dirt and for
Mhm.
free. I mean, going to a
Mm.
park costs like 110 rand. Like, are you kidding me? 110 bucks to go to a park. So, like, it's
Mm.
stuff like that. If we had more access to free and safe and green, um, and fun, just to be able to be like, okay, I'm going to take a walk and I'm going to be okay. No one's going to steal my cell phone. And it's going to be
Yeah.
a beautiful walk because I've got green things to look at. I've got birds to listen to. I've got grass at my feet and soil in my hands. I would love to see more of that. And I think that was one of the things I loved about what your drill hall is trying to do, to put art firstly in the city, but also to reforest the city, to bring nature back into like those gray concrete places. And that's part of like the joy of what you guys are trying to do. And I really
Mm.
think that's such a massive part of rehabilitating CBD and reclaiming the joy in the space of that, like just that energy of that area.
You
Yeah.
know,
The
David,
energy.
sorry.
Sorry.
I'm just saying, David, I'm thinking about just how much well, I can't speak for you, but how much I take for granted the sublime um, beauty and nature that we're surrounded by. Like in Canada, we
Mm.
are, renowned for our parks, and it's all free. It's all accessible. It's all available,
Yeah.
and particularly in Vancouver, where there is so much, resources dedicated to. I think also because of our proximity to the mountains and the water. We're very spoiled here. And David and I shit on our partners all the time for wanting to go hiking and to be out in the woods and to be in nature. And we're like, oh, but it's right there. We can go anytime, but it really is taken for granted. At least I think about that a lot.
Mm,
Um, and
Yeah.
yeah, there is something of a disconnect, I think, when we zoom out and when I'm hearing all this around, like, I had no idea you had to pay to just
Mm.
access to just go to a park,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's really depressing.
Yes.
But when you speak about zooming out, when you zoom out, if you actually look at the grander scheme of the landscape of Johannesburg, we are actually on a series of mountains,
Mm,
from Pale City to the Witwatersrand, and all of these spaces that had all of these incredible rich mineral reserves. So obviously the gold in Johannesburg, but even um, a lot of other minerals, uranium, and all of that along the other parts of the ridge. So the
Mm.
city itself, Joburg, is on a mountain itself.
Mm.
People often have the assumption that Joburg is flat, but there's hills everywhere. There's Hillbrow, one of the major parts of the inner city, is on a hill itself. So walking from the drill hole, even just up Hillbrow, that's a hike on its own. So we do a lot of hikes in the city. Hiking the city is what we call it.
Mm.
And a lot of it is around changing our perspective around nature and where to find nature. Hiking, that, this idea that nature is for people who have 110 rand, who can drive to Magaliesburg and pay that
mm,
entrance fee lodge and hike there. Meanwhile, we can hike here in the city. Actually, it's a very amazing walk, walking from the drill hole to Emarensha Dam, which is maybe, yeah, maybe it's like 15 kilometers from the drill hole. It's a nice hike, a walk. And even it's uphill as well. There's also, it's quite, yeah, I want to say it's suburban. So there are a lot of trees
Mm.
in that way. And you'll find that. So it's also about the perspective that we are trying to bring around the city, because cities were developed around nature as well, even though it was
Yeah.
around gold. But
Mm.
there's other elements of the city itself, that we are wanting to also highlight. There's bamboo growing around the city. We have medicines growing wild. We have amaranth growing wild, which is food, So there's, Johannesburg was a farm. It has its own richness. It has a lot to offer in terms of nature. So that's the perspective we are trying to bring. And even on that, what you're talking about, Nomond, in terms of the safety part, we are very big on that in terms of confronting our fears. We always encourage people. You'll hear me say all the time, when you come to the drill hall, because it's about that conquering that fear. A lot of people are like, oh, I grew up here in the inner city, or I was coming here. There were art programs we were doing here before a lot of homeless people moved in, or before the fire, or before this, and they don't want to come back. Or others even have an actual history. Maybe one of their someone, their ancestor was part of, the soldiers that were working in the space. There's a lot of tension, or even just speaking to the fact that that streets where drill hole is, black people weren't allowed to walk on that street. There was another route for them that they had to take, right? So even just confronting those traumas through walking is a very therapeutic thing that we are doing in terms of now healing in community, because we're not walking on our own. We're doing this together, right? Building up the energy of the city, the kind of city that we want to create. People who have courage, people who want to interact, people who want to know the space that they're in, because it's also through walking the city that you start to learn people, people, you find out things, you find out where to get plantain, you find out where you can get all of these different ingredients. You stumble upon a small Ethiopian coffee shop and you stop there. So it's also about that, embracing the curiosity that we have innately in us, but also just just seeing what we have around us, and just taking that as the medicine that we need.
Yeah, I'm
Mm.
thinking this is actually parallels so aligned and deeply with, and I want to get back to sort of the topic around indigenous foods, because what I'm thinking about this connection that you were just speaking about is around this embodied connection to the land, is
Mm.
to have this experience, this embodied experience of walking the land, being, a part of the land of which we are, but also making a very intentional practice out of it to bring back to that body awareness, right, or ancestral awareness. And this parallels so much with in so many of the indigenous communities and cultures here in Canada, specifically in Coast Salish lands here, where David and I are, joining this talk from. And it's very similar to what you just spoke of, Siwe, is that in that medicinal practice, the properties. I guess I'm trying to tie this back also to like indigenous foods and the concept of indigenous food for you, and Namande, because you were just speaking about plantains. So I want to know a little bit more, but maybe I'll pass it over to Namande. Maybe I want to hear your understanding or how you would define indigenous food for you.
Mhm.
Well, I'm still learning. I'm still on a major learning journey. I'm not plant based. I should say that straight up. I'm actually.
For the record, neither am I anymore, because sorry to interrupt this, because I'm entering my perimenopause stage. This is now my entirely new personality. Is I'm just perimenopause, and I'm getting hot flashes. I'm getting like and I'm anemic too. So I've been seeing my doctor quite regularly and getting blood tests quite regularly, and
Mm.
and because I've been vegetarian all my life, like I have to take iron pills now. So but I've been incorporating some fish into my diet, and some seafood. So like
Mm.
I just want to also, admit that,
Yeah,
and there's no shame around this, right? Like I want to do
yeah,
what's best for my body, and so yeah, go ahead,
yeah.
carry on.
Yeah. So, growing up, we always ate meat. Like if Black Africans and meat, like it's like I don't know, man. The things just go together. Meat was joy for us, right? Meat was like you were forced to eat like you have to eat like your pap and veggies first, and you can only eat the meat at the end. And then also growing up in scarcity,
Yeah.
getting meat, growing up in a I guess lower middle class household was challenging. We didn't get meat easily. Having meat was a treat. And so what I've struggled with as I've grown up is this idea of disconnecting eating plant-based and eating vegetarian food with this idea that now there's scarcity, there's grief. I'm not getting my meat, so I'm sad. Like, what is this food? There's no meat in it. And I'm having to sort of grow beyond that and understand and unlearn and understand why I still think that way. And it is obviously because of the history of what meat meant to my family and what it meant when we couldn't get it. And I think that's true for a lot of African people, South African people. It's true of that. Like, if you didn't live somewhere where you could go outside and kill a chicken or slaughter a cow, if you lived in an urban township like we did, and your parents went to work and earned a certain salary, and if they didn't have the money to buy meat, you didn't eat meat. That's just what it meant. And I now work in the sustainability space and in the conservation space, and the push lately, very hard, has been to get Black people to stop eating meat. This is extremely aggressive push to it, and as someone who works in that space, my pushback was always like, but we're not the ones who ate so much meat we destroyed the planet. That's not us, right? Because we didn't have the money. We didn't have the access. When we had the cows, we weren't farming on 10 million hectares and cutting down forests in order to eat our meat. So to turn around and then say, oh, if Black South Africans stop eating meat, the environment will be fine, that's nonsense. I think that's a massive cop-out. So it's all these sort of different ideas about meat and eating meat and veganism and I love animals, I love biodiversity, but I also resent this idea that it makes me a bad person to eat meat, because there's all these different ideas around it. All that to say, I think it's important to learn new ways of eating and explore ways of nutrition beyond what you sort of only accept as the way to eat, as what only gives you joy, because there is joy in eating vegetarian food. There is joy in veganism, and there is nourishment in those things, nourishment for ourselves and for the planet we live on and the other creatures we share this planet with. And for me, I'm starting this journey of figuring out what works for me in terms of my diet, becoming more plant based, finding those grains, those fruits and vegetables that my ancestors ate that are not going to set off my allergies and make me sick. I'm a very allergic person. I have like a million allergies. So I'm constantly also watching what I eat. And meat is one of those things I don't react to. So I eat a lot of meat as well as a consequence. Also struggling with the idea of how our meat is made, all the antibiotics in our meat. I found out about this dreadful medication they give to pigs and sows in order to make them grow bigger. That's basically a carcinogen and is only now getting banned globally. So it's all that sort of education and knowledge, and also the cruelty that is inherent in the way meat is commercially produced globally today. That bothers me. I'm not going to lie and say it doesn't. I hate that. I hate that. It hurts me to know that the meat we eat suffers in order to end up on our plate. I hate that. I hate that lives suffer in order for us to eat. I don't like that. And I want to go back to a time when more of us were able to. I raised my cows, I took care of my chickens, I didn't torture them before I killed them. We still slaughter for our celebrations, for weddings, for funerals. You slaughter a sheep, you slaughter a cow. When we visit my sister in Kokstad, in KZN, and her and her husband have a farm in the Eastern Cape, slaughter a chicken. But we don't torture those animals before we eat them. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's this struggle for me, this journey towards how I consume, finding ways to consume that my soul can live with, and finding ways to consume that also make sense for me and as many people as possible in this country. And if we can learn how to do that, if we can find those ways again and return to those roots as much as possible, make just the world we inhabit better for everyone, including the cows and the pigs and the chickens. Make it better for them too. But yeah, that's my sort of story. But the reason why I wanted to do this Hot Pot Talks is because I'm learning. I don't know. I've never had a cake without eggs and milk. I'm super excited. I told Siwe I'm gonna come to a bakery. I can't wait to try that. I'm obsessed with cake. So I wanna learn those flavors. I wanna eat sorghum. I've never eaten sorghum before. Isn't that
Mm.
crazy? I've never had cassava ever. Um, and I want to eat those things. I want to rediscover those things. I want to see how they treat my body. I want to learn how they make me feel. And I want us to teach as many people as we can how joyful it is to live this way and teach them it's not actually new, it's ancient. And bringing these
Mm.
ancient, beautiful ways of living in community and eating as a collective, as a way that is healing instead of destructive. And yeah, that's what I want. And that's what I'm hoping we can get from these conversations, the global and the local ones. That's what I want.
Thank-
Yeah, indigenous foods. I think for me, the perspective as someone who is a vegetarian, ital, actually, we say we are italists. We eat ital as Rastas. The idea is from the word vital. We say ital is vital, meaning that we eat food that is life giving, food that is alive, food that is contributing really to your health, medicinal foods. So also when I think about these healthful foods, a friend of mine likes to say healthful and unhealthful foods, and I think this indigenous foods are healthful foods. A lot of the time, you find that indigenous foods are medicinal foods and medicine. Plant medicine comes from medicinal foods. So plants being our medicine has always been, the basis of how indigenous practices were kind of established in terms of how we heal ourselves. And importantly for me, I think what I've been just learning is understanding this idea about seasonal foods. Because that just means you're more connected to the actual environment that you're in. So even though a lot of people might even say cassava is not one of our indigenous foods. It's indigenous more to South America and it came to Africa with the Portuguese. But in my studies of how I'm understanding now is indigenous foods, some of the academics are saying it's foods that have been eaten for at least 100 years that become now traditional foods. So they've kind of been incorporated into our culture, which is what I find that yeah, cassava is one of those things. But yeah, overall I have this theory in general that all foods come from Africa and that eventually, yeah, that's everything. Yeah, anyway, so we're kind of safe. In my journey, what I've discovered now, just in terms of this topic around indigenous foods and those being the healthy foods, is also seeing the diversity of what we actually have. So we are, I guess, just in my experience, I found that eating plant-based, Nomonde was speaking about how it was quite limiting not having meat, growing up. And a lot of people, when they start eating vegetarian food, they'll have the carbs and the veggies and the meat, and then they just remove the meat and say, no, I'm vegetarian,
Mm.
which is something to get over. I don't think that's the correct or expensive way of thinking about it, because we have fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and grains. Like those are the five food groups. And within these, there are like maybe 30 or 40 kinds of foods within here. So it's quite a broad list of foods that you can eat. Like just the fruits, I've discovered tamarind, I've discovered baobab, I've discovered amahlala. I've discovered, so many other fruits. I've discovered eating more coconut, understanding the tropical environment that we are in and how to eat for that climate, or even discovering sorghum, that there's different types of sorghum, there's different types of millet, pearl millet, finger millet, foxtail millet, all of these things that are just, expanding my understanding of these healthy foods. So what even blew my mind even further is discovering that all of these African grains are gluten-free grains. So a lot of us are currently suffering from bloating, constipation, because we're eating a lot of wheat and gluten that is not that is highly processed and it's not natural to our environment. Whereas you find sorghum and amaranth grow wildly and they're even drought resistant, so they are constantly there for us. So our environment has a way of communicating with us in terms of what is necessary at a certain time. So I think just getting in tune with that, and understanding your own body cycle and your environment cycle is part of that practice of indigeneity, and understanding the foods that we're meant to be eating at a certain time for a certain purpose.
Mm.